Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Pavel Pish. I'm Curator of Visual Arts and Collection Strategy here at the Walker. Welcome this evening. It's such a pleasure to have you all here to celebrate the opening of Stanley Whitney, How High the Moon, and be witness to what I think will be a really wonderful conversation. Before we begin, I'd like to ground us by acknowledging that the Walker and the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden are located on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary homelands of the Dakota people. This site, which was once an expanse of marshland and meadow, holds meaning for the Dakota, Ojibwe, and indigenous people from other nations living among us in the community today. It's my pleasure to acknowledge the supporters of How High the Moon and its presentation here at the Walker. I would like to thank Jan Breyer. I'd like to thank the Martin and Brown Foundation, Michael Peterman and David Wilson, as well as Annette and John Whaley. Thank you so much for your support. And I would also like to thank our Free Thursday night sponsor, Principal Foundation. So tonight, before I begin, I want to encourage you all to go to our shop and purchase the beautiful catalog that Cathleen Chaffee, who is sitting in the front row and who you will hear from in a little bit, the exhibition's curator from Buffalo AKG Art Museum that organized this wonderful survey. It's a great resource. It's beautifully illustrated. It has great contributions. Congratulations, Kathleen, on such a wonderful monograph. I'm not going to speak for too long. I'm just going to frame what's going to unfold before you this evening. So after my short introduction, we will be joined by Stanley and Odili on the stage. They will speak together for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then the exhibition's curator, Kathleen, will join and ask a couple of questions and then moderate a Q&A. You have Stanley and Odili's bios. I'm not going to dwell on those. I think that what I'm really excited about tonight is that we're going to hear from two artists who share a deep engagement with abstraction and a deep, deep love of painting, particularly engaging with color and its various symbolic meanings, personal meanings, cultural, political, and social meanings. But also, I think Stanley and Odili share an interest in the world at large, and if you start thinking about their work, there are many moments where their practices dovetail, whether it's in interest in music, literature, or even vernacular crafts that they're looking at as artists, as visual thinkers. But crucially, they are also friends. So they have been in dialogue and thinking about art together for a number of years. So it's really a privilege for us, I think, to share a little bit of space with them and hear from both of them. And with that, I invite Stanley Whitney and Odili Donald Odita to join us on the stage.
Okay, it's on, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I first would like to thank Pavel and the Walker Art Center for inviting me here to speak in front of all of you and to give me the opportunity to speak with Stanley. Okay. I'd also like to thank Kathleen for her expert curatorial work in providing the Italian painting exhibition and then the retrospective at the Albright Knox Gallery. It's an exceptionally strong exhibition because of the way in which you can see nuance and difference in each and every object that's on view. I want to first read this statement, and then we'll go right into the discussion. I believe it was John Cage who once told me, when you start working, everybody is in your studio. The past, your friends, enemies, the art world, and above all, your own ideas. All are there, but as you continue painting, they start leaving, one by one, and you are left completely alone. Then, if you're lucky, even you leave. Now, this quote is really kind of a context for how I see Stanley's development technically and via mark making in the painting as it transforms over the decades. And we'll get to that detail as we speak. And so first of all, I want to just quickly say that Stanley and I met when I saw a show of his at Scoto Gallery on Prince Street in 1994. And I'm older than I look. And
I'm younger.
Exactly. So I saw these paintings it was a group show with Stanley and Saul LeWitt. And I had come in and I saw these paintings on the wall. It was just a collage of the small paintings all over the back wall. And I was like, oh my God, wow, who is this? And I have to meet this person. So I talked to Scoto, who was a family friend. I said, Scoto, you got to get me in contact with this artist. I have to meet this artist. This is just too good. I believe, I don't know if I called, Marina was saying that I sent you an email or a letter, maybe even something handwritten. But I remember that I reached out to you, you guys reached back to me, and we've been basically in contact with each other ever since then.
Yeah, we have, yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Skidmore College, the Columbus College of Art and Design, Kansas City Art Museum, Yale. In 6 years, you attended these institutions, which are among the best art schools in America. Can you describe that person who was able to attend these great schools through this short time frame? Who was this person, and how do you see yourself now looking back?
Well, I got out of high school in '64, which was really a big draft year, with the war, Vietnam War. But I kind of knew I was an artist. I didn't know much about art schools. I mean, I was in Philadelphia, and so I really was on my own in a sense. I think sometimes as an artist, you're born in a family, they have no idea who you are or why you're an artist, and and they're kind of scared for you, because they have no idea what you're doing, and you can't explain it yourself because you don't know exactly what kind of artist you are. But I went to this small art school in Columbus, Ohio, just to get away from Philadelphia, because Philly in those days was kind of it was a really rough kind of city, and I was really from the suburbs, so I wasn't really knew where to be in Philadelphia or what neighborhood was safe, what wasn't. And I went to a high school that didn't really have a great art program, so I never even went to the Philadelphia Museum. In fact, even when I was in Kansas City, someone said, "You ever been to the Barnes Foundation?" And I said, "What's that?" But so I sort of, the idea of going to the Midwest was really going to art school that had a BFA, so Columbus did. The one thing I was lucky about in going to an art school, even in Columbus, Ohio, was it was connected to the museum, and so I was able to go look at paintings. And one of the first paintings I saw was a Cézanne that I immediately fell in love with. And then from there, I ended up going to Kansas City, which was a bigger school, and they offered me a scholarship and money, so I went off to Kansas City. And that school, too, was connected to a museum, so I was able to go paint and then, go right across the street and look at paintings. So even though I didn't know what I was doing or how I was pursuing it or what was going on, I just by luck, was able to be at these art schools and see a lot of art and because you're trying to figure out what kind of artist you are. I mean, I think today it's even harder for young people to figure out sort of what kind of artist you are, even what kind of a painter. I mean, there's so many ways of being an artist now. So I ended up I fell in love with painting, and that was it. I didn't want to take anything else. I didn't take any photography classes or anything like that. I just fell in love with painting.
Can you describe the kind of relationships you had with your teachers and professors? Was it a given that you had mentors that were guiding and nurturing? Was this something you were seeking out?
No. I really was just really in the studio painting. I was looking at a lot of art. Because I was in Philadelphia, I would go home in the summertime, and I had friends who were in New York. I'd go to New York, and I'd go to the museum to look at everything. And so then I'd go back to school. But But I didn't really have, until I really met Guston, I didn't have anybody who really, I would show me my work, but that was about it. I didn't have anyone I really could say was a great teacher in terms of my painting. I was just trying things, looking at things, and kind of on my own, to tell you the truth. Kansas City, that school, the biggest department was the sculptors. That was probably the biggest department. Painting was probably the least. There was a good design department, but painting wasn't really a big part of the school at that time when I was there. So I was just trying things out myself and doing things. I had teachers who were good, but not really someone who really showed me a lot about painting until I met Guston, really.
So you've always spoken about being a step outside of inclusion, of being outside of the main conversation, in a sense, like just an outsider, not in any particular group, in any particular time. Is this how you felt as a student? And were you always focused on becoming an artist and painter, or was this outside of the scope of possibility?
No. I always thought I was a painter, but I had a hard time figuring out my subject matter. You know, I liked all kinds of painting. I mean, I would go across and look at, say, Courbet, and think about Courbet, or I would look at Japanese work or Chinese work, or all different kinds of things, and I was trying to figure out just what I wanted in my studio. I think the big thing about the studio is trying to figure out sort of like what you want in the studio, what you want to do, and then if you put your work up and you think, is this the right? If people look at it, is it the right conversation? Is this what you're trying to get across? So I really didn't know much about really that. I really. I went to art school. It was a really sort of difficult time in the country, with Martin Luther King was going on. You had the Black Panthers, you had the Vietnam War. You had all these different things that were happening, and I wanted to paint. And I really couldn't defend that position. I couldn't really say why, painting was something I want to do. If the Black Panthers came by, I would tell them I'm not home. Because I couldn't figure out really how to defend that position, in terms of painting, But I really felt that was something I had to do and wanted to do. And I wasn't really making paintings yet that I really, I was really struggling, really trying to figure out, just who I was.
Were you aware of the cultural significance of Philip Guston at the time you met him, and really what was going on in his paintings at that time?
No, because I met Guston, I guess it was 66 or 60, I forget, 66. I was a junior in college at art school, and, it was a new art program. I had, in Kansas City, junior year you apply to Yale. Norfolk was the place you wanted to go. Yale Norfolk was really like, if you were in art school, there's certain art schools, I think even here in Minnesota, if you were really one of the best students, you would be sort of nominated. They would send 2 nominations to Yale, and you wanted to go to Yale Norfolk, which I didn't get in. My first big disappointment, I didn't get in. And there was this other program. They said, well, 'cause I was very disappointed. I think I should have gotten in. And so they said, well, this other program in Skidmore, and do you want to do that? And I said, yes. So I had no idea what Skidmore was, and at the time in Kansas City, I always want to go back to New York. I think New York is the center of the art world. I want to get to New York. So I thought, well, this would be great. So I go there, and I meet Bob Reed, who is this Afro-American painter, educator, who must have been maybe in his 30s, and I was totally shocked because I had any other black contact with even a black. I thought maybe I was the only black painter there was. You know what I mean? I had no idea.
So there were no artists of color, black people in the classes.
And no, I had some friends who were mostly in design, but not in painting.
Right.
So that was a big thing. And Bob became a big mentor of mine. Bob, years later, went on to Yale and recruited me for Yale. That's why I went to Yale, because of Bob. And then I think they got Guston to come, because Guston was living in Woodstock. And Guston was considered maybe at that time a second-tier abstract expressionist. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't really a popular painter at that time. Mm-hmm. And so they got Guston there. And at that point in time, I had been painting figurative, and that kind of died. I mean, I was used to paint a lot of self-portraits and try things and try different kinds of things. I would go to museums and go to galleries and look at things and think, oh, that's interesting. I'll try that. I'll try this. So I was just putting things together. You know, I think as a painter, you're almost kind of like putting a recipe together. You know, how much of this, how much of that, you know, what you need, what you want to bring to your studio. And so, so when I met Guston, I was kind of lost. And so with Bob Reed, we'd go outside and draw landscapes, which I never did before. I'd go outside and draw. And Guston, he came in, he liked my work. He liked me and a couple other people and said, you guys are the artists, and didn't pay attention to many other people. And we became pretty good friends, you know, that summer. Mm-hmm. I had no idea what he was doing. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's funny because I was kind of lost. I had no idea that he was going towards figuration, and I was going from figuration to abstraction.
But you were looking at his work, or you just...
No, not looking at his work at all. He would come 1 day or 2 days a week and come to my set and we'd talk. Sometimes we'd walk around together. And I remember one time exactly, we were walking around and we ran into this red Cadillac car, convertible. And Phil said to me, why don't you paint that car? And I go, why would I want to paint that car? I don't paint that car. I'm sure he did. You know what I mean? So it's like that. And we go down. He said, why don't you go downtown and paint downtown? And I go, I don't want to paint downtown. You know. So I had no idea what he was doing. He wasn't showing his work to anybody. You know, I was still thinking he was doing the abstract work. And he was. And then I wanted to go to New York. He said, look, you should go to New York. I said, look, I've been trying to get to New York since 1964. You know, he said, well, I can get you a scholarship maybe to the studio school. I said, great. But the studio school was not accredited, and so Kansas City didn't want me to go. But then through Phil up in Kansas City, I got it done, and I moved to New York. But Phil was a big influence on me. But at that time, I was doing a lot. You know, it was a really difficult time in my life. You know, moving to New York, getting a job, but Philip was very important to me.
And I want to just underscore you. So you're saying that there were not any other African-American students in the painting program or in any way that you saw. It was just they were in the design field.
Yeah, they were in design.
Because
they wanted to get, because of jobs.
Right.
You know, for
so
economics.
Painting was really a risk to be in.
Well, painting, you know, it wasn't real clear to me because I, you know, when I was in Philadelphia, I came from a family that never went to the museum or never talked about art. I mean, I came from a family who, you know, I mean, even when I moved to New York, I had my parents would come and I'd take them to the museum and they go, okay, this is very nice, but let's go eat. You know what I mean? You know, it's funny, I was looking at a thing on Instagram today, Richard Tuttle talking about his father and saying his father never knew who he was. And his father was always after him to try to change him. You know, and had no idea. So that was like me. My father was always after me to try to change me. Like, who is this kid? Right. What is this kid doing? You know what I mean? You can't do this. You know what I mean?
He was scared.
They're scared for it, of course. Right. And they're scared for you, you know. And they think, what are you doing? And I got involved with a very bohemian life. I didn't get involved with the NAACP or this bourgeois life. I was very involved with the Bohemians. I was interested in the jazz music.
Was he approving? Were their parents approving or disapproving of that?
No, they did not approve. Of course, they didn't approve because what's that lead to? Right. You know, if you're coming out of a really poor middle class family that wants you to get ahead, get a good solid job, you know, and so my father would try to talk me, which didn't do any good, and he would try to get other people to talk to me, you know. But, you know, I have to say, the great thing about them is they let me go. They let me go. You know, they let me go off to school, and they didn't get in my way. And so that's a big thing. They did not get in my way. They had no idea what I was doing, but they didn't get in my way.
Okay. In the early 1980s, were you aware of the pictorial connections between your work from that time and Guston's transitional work from the late 1950s and early 60s, which I just showed? Do you feel you carried any insights he gave you at Skidmore and through other meetings you had with him in New York, outside of the stories you just mentioned?
Not really. I mean, you know, when I moved to New York in '68, it was still a pretty rough town. It was just the beginning of Soho. You could walk down Broadway at night and you wouldn't see a single person. You know, when I first got to New York, you know, if you ever been to what Soho is now, you know, I had a friend who had a loft on Great Jones Street, which is a little north of Soho. And they said, there's a party down in Soho, you know, loft party, because artists always do these loft parties. So I said, okay. So I go down there, I get the house on the street, and I look in, and this is big black kind of square. There's no street lights, nothing. I said, I'm not going in there, you know. But then you realize it's very safe because no one's there, you know. No, you know, it was really trying to figure out things. It was really early in my life, and I didn't really know. You have your girlfriend I'm breaking up with, you know, you have all these things going on in your life, and you're trying to find a job that pays your rent. You know, you're trying to do all these different things, and then you're trying to paint. But it was really, everyone was in that same thing. You know what I mean? It was really like a really unique time at that time in the year. There was no money. But you could get a loft for $150, and you could get a carpentry job or something and make $80, $90 in a week. You know what I mean? Although I was a terrible carpenter. But I did my best. Anyway, but, you know, there were jobs that we found. And then, you know, then I got a job working at Pearl Paint. When Pearl Paint went, because he realized that was all these artists, he had a paint store, and he opened up a art supply store upstairs. And there were 3 of us that worked at Pearl Paint when it first opened up in the art supply store. And it was great. So I meant, like, I cut canvas for Barnett Newman. I meant, you know, all these. I didn't necessarily meet these artists, but I saw them all, you know, and talked to them all. You know what I mean? And so I got to see all this stuff. So I'm just trying to piece my life together. You know what I mean? I'm piece my life together. So it's just really as an artist, you're taking risk. You know, you want to take big risks. You want to try to figure things out. But when you're young, you know, you can do all that. You want to take advantage of your youth. You know what I mean? And so I felt that even though I didn't know it was going to take me or what I was doing, I was really doing what I loved. You know what I mean? I mean, as an artist, you're very lucky because you find something early on that you really love to do. You know what I mean? But people, of course, think, well, you're not going to make any money, you know, and stuff like that, and maybe you won't. You know, it's really true. I mean, I didn't. Where I am now, I never thought where I'd be. I never thought where I am now I'd be. Never.
Yeah, it's something like in art school, you kind of prepare yourself to basically be poor. Or to be,
well, you know, I didn't really worry about that. I mean, I had a great time in art school. You know, so life was good. I mean, life was good. You're with friends who are doing what they want to do, and you're all hanging out. And you don't need that much when you're young. You know what I mean? You don't need that much.
But the idea of, like, being employable, like, to have that 9-to-5 job, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, but you make, you know, through your friends, you're making, you know, what are you doing? How you getting by? You know what I mean? Everyone's helping everyone else out. You know what I mean? So you do have this network of people that you're working with, that you're helping each other, you know, get by.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's not something like, you know, you're only on your own when you're in the studio. You know what I mean? And that's something that you like. You know, you really like being on your own. You like making these decisions. You like being in the studio. So that's the kind of thing you find out when you're young. Do you like this? You know, do you really want to do this? Is it really worth it? You know, so I could do it. I mean, I could, you know, when I was really poor, I could go 2-3 days without eating.
Right.
You know, I could survive.
I find that, like, with art, you know, my own practice and looking back at how I've done it, it's something that you realize when you're very, very young. You know what I mean? Like 5 years old or something like that. Like, young?
Well, 5 I had no idea. 5 I just drew everything.
Yeah.
You know,
that's
I
what-
mean, 5 was great. Kindergarten was great. First grade was so good.
Yeah.
12 years I had to get through 12 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I was back to kindergarten again.
I spent a lot of time. I spent a lot of time tracing a lot of things as a kid.
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you this now. I would like to ask you about the ovoid forms you began to depict in your paintings from the early 1980s. How did this come about, and what connections do you see, if any, to those transitional Augustan paintings from the late 50s, early 60s? And what I am showing here, this painting in particular, why I'm struck by these particular paintings and seeing them and seeing the development of these paintings is how the mark situates itself in there. In a certain way, there's a kind of presence that you have with the mark, like is the artist standing there making the mark. And at the same instance, it seems like it's reiterating the circular form or implying a sort of kind of life energy within those circular forms. So
You're so smart. I never thought of it that way. You know, they were. What happened with that was, I did some prints that I liked at Bob Blackburn. In fact, Marina, my wife now painter, she was working there and got me to do these prints. And I liked the prints a lot and what was happening with that. And I liked what happened with the prints. I used I forget what the medium was, but those paintings. If you go back to that painting, that was acrylic, and I couldn't really get what I wanted in acrylic, and so I was painting on the floor, and I was making, and I wanted things to be very natural. I just wanted things to be really kind of natural. I mean, I didn't like the idea of, you know, in fact, when I was a kid in the city, I remember we heard in New York they're making hard edge paintings. And I was like thinking, what could that possibly be? Because I'm thinking about like maybe Cezanne, or I'm thinking of Velasco. I'm thinking of these people. I think, how can that painting be hard edge? I had no idea what that could be. And I didn't like the idea of that anyway. And so I really want things to be very natural. And I tended to, when I mix my paint, to mix it like in a circle. You know what I mean? Just like, I just do it. So it was sort of like taking what was happening on my palette and putting it on the canvas. You know what I mean? So it was really like that. And so, and so there were certain things I wanted in the paintings. You know, I wanted density, but I wanted a lot of air. I wanted a lot of a good rhythm. So that all these things I wanted, but how was I going to get it? And where could I steal from other artists to take to my studio and try to figure out what I could do with it? Mm-hmm. So you're always, when I got to New York, 57th Street was mostly where all the galleries were, and if we worked on, there's a group of us painting friends, maybe 5 or 6 painting friends. We'd meet at Horn and Hardocks in those days, on 57th Street, and we'd meet in the morning, and then we'd go down and see all the art, all the galleries, and look at everything, and then you go home and think, well, I like this, I like that, and you try things, try this, try that. So really, it's just really what's open, trying different things and trying to figure out like, is that and I knew I was an abstract painter. That was something that I found out early on, and so I was just trying to figure out things. Here I am in Egypt looking at things, and Egypt was one of the last. Like I said, I keep thinking it's a recipe in a way, and Egypt was the last piece of the puzzle for me to make the paintings that you see here. Egypt was really the last thing I needed. In Egypt, I figured out what density was. You know, the thing about painting is some things are very easy to do physically, but it's really mental. I mean, I always use Mondrian's example of going from a black line to a red line, which you can do very easily, but it took him years to make that black line turn to a red line and really have great meaning. So that's the kind of things you're working on all the time. You know, even my show here, I look at the paintings and think about where I'm going to go, what I want to do. Especially with a retrospect, I can look back at my old paintings and think, oh, that's interesting. Or There are paintings I didn't really like now, which I really love now, and what do I want to keep, what I want to change, what's important to me. So you're always really searching.
It's significant to see the picture of you standing in front of the Palazzo Farnese, because this is how I've always understood your painting from the late 1990s and early 2000s, as windows and window frames seen as if from the face of a building, and equally as shelving to hold the window frames in level. For me, the windows also double as heads on a shelf. Can you speak about this picture and the significance of Rome?
Well, Rome, Rome is very important to me, really, very important time for me. But I think I'd to say, before Rome, I was in California, teaching at Berkeley, at Stanford, and we drove across country maybe 2 or 3 times. And that's important because I love what was happening in terms of the landscape, the Southwest, the sky, the openness, and what that landscape was and how big this continent is. It's like even being here today in a city and just thinking how much space there is, space. Mm-hmm. So I really, that was very important. So I was thinking about space and things that way. Then when I got to Rome, architecture came into it. So I had this idea of space, big space, a lot of space. And then in Rome, I get there was architecture, And mostly architecture, what struck me really, I would go to the Colosseum and think, it seems to have a really human scale. It's really big, but it seems like from the first brick to the last brick has a really human scale. Mm-hmm. And then I would go look at ceramics, the Etruscan Museum and all this. I look at ceramics and think how it was made. And then I'm always trying to think about the color. I want the color, I want the space, I want the drawing. And then it came to me, I thought, just stack the colors, Stanley. Stack it, And so that was a big thing. So the architecture was really, really important. But also in Rome, if you're going to go to Rome, if you stand in the shadow, it's one temperature. You stand in the sun, it's another temperature. Mm-hmm. So Rome, in terms of really, and we traveled all the ancient world. Wherever the Romans went, we went. All over the Mediterranean. So I got to see everything. But really, the big thing when I was in Egypt, density came to me, because I always thought if I put the color next to each other, I wouldn't have that space. But then it came to me that I realized that the space was in the color. All these little stupid, dumb things took me, these things take years and years to figure out, and so that's what happened in Rome. So once I got to Rome, and we left New York because nothing's happening in New York. I got there in 1968. I went to Rome, 94, 92. And between 68 and 92 in New York, no one was interested in what I was doing. I had some shows here and there, but didn't really make any money. I was teaching full-time at Temple University Tyler School of Art. And they had a school in Rome, so we decided, Marina and I decided, let's just go to Rome and get out of here. Mm-hmm. And we went to Rome. And that was probably one of the best things I ever did. I should have gone to Europe sooner.
Mm. The shelving, does it imply hierarchy, levels of up versus down, or is it non-hierarchical? Is it a non-hierarchical analysis of place as conditional to space or color? And I'm saying this in reference to how you speak synonymously about space as color or color as space. And let me just say this. I understand that you start your paintings top down, which makes sense as you won't drip onto spaces already completed. Is this a logical and practical decision for you in your painting process?
No.
Okay. Okay.
Nothing's logical, nothing's practical. Okay. No. It just it's really how things feel. It's really everything's about how things feel. So I just felt, when I went to Egypt, there were some, walls that were not painted all the way, and they start at the bottom and work their way up, But I always loved Morris Lewis's paintings. And I love the gravity. And, what happened is you would look at this painting, oh, well, this is what I like about this painting. I like gravity. What I like about this painting is I like the use of, oh, look at the way, like Guston, I think Guston's paint is so beautiful. You know what I mean? Just that paint, oh my God, you can eat that paint. You know what I mean? So there's all these different things about painters that you say you could steal or take, And then they have the world, and you can take from this and take from that. Ceramics, I take from ceramics. I take from looking at the sky. I take from looking at a tree. You take all these things, you take them back to your studio, and you think, how are you going to interpret them? So that's how I'm thinking about things. And so it just seemed logical to me to start at the top and work the way down, And I said, I wanted to do a poet friend of mine, I'm like a bricklayer. She said, yeah, like a bricklayer, but you start from the top and work your way down. So it's like, so it just feels right to me, And if things feel right, things sit right, then they're right. And that it's really about that. I'm not really into science or it doesn't have to be logical. It doesn't have to be right or wrong. It just feels right.
But there's so much embodiment in what you're saying with the painting being right, and I think that there's so much of your premise, your history, and your time in all of that rightness. In your painting, drawing is everything. It depicts the borders. It defines the frame within space, and it delineates the space overall. From the late 1990s to the present, your paintings become less about the appearance of drawing and more about the painting itself, or more about painting itself. Consequently, drawing becomes and appears as an infinite condition in the way that you develop your painting. Can you speak to this shift in your drawing and how it transformed your color and the structure of space over this period? And what was this structural transformation about for you? And let me just say that the slides that I showed right before this painting are to define those kinds of, I would call them negative space when you're dealing with a figure-ground relationship. And that disappears, and the paintings become faster for it.
Well, I don't think there's anything, I never believe in negative space. I don't think there's anything. I don't believe there's anything like. There's no negative space. There's just, for me, there's just space. I always thought that was a really weird thing. I don't know where it came from or who did that. But
when speaking about your work or in general.
Well, just speaking about work in general, saying negative space, a positive space. I mean, that's one thing I liked about Edward Munch's paintings, is that. And even the Cézanne I saw when I was a young student, because the figure in the painting, but the floor, the back, the wall, it's just as important. So, and if you look at Edward Munch's paintings, there could be a figure sitting there and a chair, and the chair is just as alive as the figure, and that's how I see the world. Like everything's alive. It's like, so that's how I think about things. So it was just a way for me to try to have as much in the paintings as I could. And and color was always something that I could work with. I knew all the time I could always take a drawing and make it better by adding color. I was always a colorist. But I was like, but where is color? How can I make color really dominate? So these paintings, the way for me, I can do a lot with color, and I can really have it be a lot of open space. So the viewer has lots of room. You really want to have it so people have a lot of room to really mentally wander. They can mentally wander anywhere they want. You don't, even though I know where I started, where I ended, the viewer doesn't really know that as I tell them, and every day you can start someplace else or go someplace else in the paintings. So they're really meant to really be lived with and that, and so that's how I do it. I don't really think too much about theory or, I'm always looking, at art. I'm always looking at nature. I'm always, just life itself, and I read a lot. And bring stuff to my studio and work. I don't start a painting and know what color it's going to be. I have this format, so that allows me a lot of freedom. I've always loved Mondrian that way, So I have the stupid format, but then with the color, my drawing, and the size and scale, I don't draw it out first and then add the color. I just start and put color down. And so they lead me, they tell me. Then I do the painting and I look at it and think about, well, what is that? Or is it good? Is it bad? Do I like it? I never like it. And I slowly, I like it when they go out and I see them and think, oh, I like that now. But it takes me a long time to see them. I can make them, but it takes me a long time to see them. I don't see them right away. I don't know what they are right away. They're like really they're like strangers and they become friends. But it takes me a long time to do all this.
It seems though that like with the marks as they dissipate and become more atmospheric, that you become more expansive. The experience becomes more expansive within the paintings, conceptually, psychologically, and visually. And I think that underscores the notion of experience. So I'd like to ask you about your thoughts on spontaneity and what do you think about spontaneity and activity?
The music's always, when I was young, living in a small little, black community, everyone was trying to get to be middle class, and I didn't see myself anywhere. You look around and say, where am I? Who am I? When you meet people and go, well, that's not me. But then when I started running into the jazz musician, like particular certain people, like Edward Monk and Eric Dolphy, and that music, and I thought, oh, that's me. That's who I am. When I heard Ornette Coleman, Shape of Jazz to Come, I thought, well, that's me. That's where I am. So that kind of led me to. So the music's always very important to me, and it's the intellect of the music. It has such great intellect. I don't like the word jazz because I think it's so awful, but I think because it's certain, because I don't like any old jazz. I'm very particular about what artists I like, just like painters, what painters I like.
Well, jazz, when you say it like that too, I mean it's so nondescript.
Yeah,
it's very vague.
Exactly. So there's certain people I really like to this day. I have records that I bought when I was 18 that I still listen to today, that are very important to me. So all that in terms of, you take all that into your studio and that. So, it's like Sunrise said, the vibrations of the day. So you want to get the vibrations of the day in your painting.
So spontaneity is it certainly, is it performative as well in the process of making? Is it something that you see it as like, and I don't mean performative in the sense of being a performance artist.
I don't know.
Okay. Let me speak about that then. Let me speak about that a little bit.
I have no idea.
Let me speak about it a little bit. There, in my own culture, as Nigerian African, the idea of the new is really relative to a new day, or it's linked to the idea of a new day. The idea of starting the day, not knowing what the day will be, but making ritual or practice that celebrates that moment of the day and what's going to come forward in front of you. So performance and spontaneity is, in a sense, part of this notion of the new, because you don't know necessarily what will come forward, but you have faith.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think that's something about West African intellect. You know what I mean? And I would say, for Afro-Americans who come here and don't really have a sense of really their total history, it's that there are things that you do in the intellect that are just there, that have been passed down. You know what I mean? So I think what you say makes perfect sense to me, and I kind of feel that's true. But I never really thought of it that way. When I think about that, what is West African intellect? You know what I mean? And what that is. And I have it in my work, but how it got there, whether it was like me going to a Baptist church, and having people, having the older women two-step up the aisle, doing the music, or have the preacher preaching, and then when the music comes on, you know what I mean? What happens? Or, you know, those kinds of things are they're just in your life. They're just in you, and things are passed down to you. Because even here, people talk about, you know, the Swedes being here and what that is. And I think, you know, with Afro-Americans being here and what we've done and how you survive all this, you know, stuff. Even myself always, like when I was a kid in Philadelphia, every 2 steps the cops were like, what are you doing? Where are you going? Why are you here? And all of that, and choosing like sort of like how you deal with that day, you know, getting through that day. Or like even now we have so many, you know, people in prison, and they do it one day at a time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, all those kinds of things, you know, are there. I don't have to really intellectualize them, but you need, if you're going to be an artist in the studio, you need everything you can possibly get, you know, to make a piece of art that's going to really affect people. So I'm out to really anything I can get, you know, use in terms of that. So you really want to look at great artists, because great artists, you know, have that in their work, and art that's lasted over, you know, centuries. It's great. It could be ceramics, it could be fabric, it could be all kinds of things, you know, that are there that I kind of look at and use and try to do that.
This is a poignant piece for me to introduce this last topic I want to talk about. In thinking about the discussion today, I wanted to ask you the question about the race issue, and the term you've brought up before. And I want to speak about belonging. And in addition, the difficulty of noticing differences, the difficulty of noticing difference within your work.
What do you mean differences? Like what?
Well, when I look at this image, no prison life, you know, and I see that grid, I think of what you've been able to do in the most amazing way, which is, in a certain sense, bring the grid as a form of structure to balance out your painting, let's say, and then using color to transform the nature of the grid that we see here as a prison, let's say, or to transform the structure, that Western structure of the grid, into this space that becomes infinite and all-encompassing. You have a first room in the gallery here at the Walker Art Center that when you walk into it, you feel immediate joy. And it's intense, and it's surprising. It's surprising because you don't think that that's going to happen when you encounter those paintings. And that's something of the power that you're bringing to the work. And it's something that's respective to the time we're living now, especially what happened last week when we see the history of race and racism in America and sexism in America come full force and present and unveiled in the decision that was made here in this country. So when we talk about the race issue, and something that your work somehow seems to avoid, but at the same instance, it's embodied in the work, that to me is an amazing situation where you can speak about it beyond it, and bring people together in a notion or in a space of belonging, because the race issue is not about belonging.
Very well said. Well, what do you want me to say now? Yeah.
You made that. No to
Well,
prison life.
that came out of, I read a book called Blood in the Water about Attica.
Yeah.
You know, it was called Blood in the Water. And when I was a student at Yale in 72, Attica was going on, and Archie Shepp made a beautiful album called Attica Blues. But I thought I knew what was happening in Attica, you know what I mean? But reading this book, this woman researched and did this book, I realized I had no idea. And when you read about the people who forget the grass is green, you know what I mean? or that haven't seen a night sky in 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And you think about what that is. It's quite amazing. So the idea that, you can give someone 20 years, and put them
Sentence for 20 years.
Yeah, put them in the cell for 20 years. I just think, pure torture.
Mm-hmm.
Because people do change. People can change. I don't want to have, murderers running around the street. Don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think what it is, it's just too many people in prison in this country, and so I just read that book, and then I just thought no to prison life.
Mm-hmm.
So I and then I don't know. They ended up on the cover of Art Forum, which I never thought I'd be on the cover of Art Forum, and plus it wasn't even a painting. I wasn't a painting on the cover. But yeah, I just think about that. So. The drawings I have, all the things in books, I write things down in the books. So I have lots of different practices, like the big wall up there with everything on that wall. It kind of shows my whole practice, besides the paintings. So yeah, I'm very, aware of, like I said, I'm a big reader. I'm very aware of, this country, other countries. I just read a great book on Indonesia and how the freedom of Indonesia and the revolution in Indonesia, after the Second World War. And one thing I liked about that was to tell all your young people what's going on now is that in that revolution in Indonesia in 1949, it was people 15 to 21. So those kind of things. So in my work, I want to have all that kind of freedom and love, and and all the positive things that you can bring to life.
Absolutely, I think that absolutely, 100%. That wall of drawings is brilliant, and again, we're going to bring Kathleen up, and I want to say that that wall that you put in your show is brilliant, and it shows everything that. Where you start and where you come to. Yeah, it's really great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Oh, great.
So I think we'll invite everybody to go get a snack. We're going to come back and reverse it, and then you can interview Odili. Is that cool? We'll stay a couple hours? I would love to hear it.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah.
You have to invite us back in late winter, so I can see that blue sky and the snow, and hear the sound of
All right,
the.
I'm bringing the microphone over here.
Yeah, and hear the sound of the Great Lakes cracking. I would love to do that. So.
I think there's a fact that's so interesting to me, having been on stage and thinking about how we could flip things, is. You're two such very different artists, but at the same time, there's a lot of overlap in your careers. And one of the things is you're sick of me trying to get you to talk about teaching, so I'm not going to do it so much.
I can talk about teaching,
but I also want to say, both you and Odili taught at Tyler for, I know how many years you did. How many years did you teach at Tyler?
Since 2006.
And you're emeritus now.
No.
You're still actively teaching.
I'm not that old.
Yeah, but when I left there, he got hired.
Yeah.
When I left there, I wanted to make sure that he got hired.
Right.
So I left and he came.
Right.
So that's how it worked.
Right.
I mean, I just can't underline enough how important it is, and I'm sure for many people in the room, this element that is a job, right? But it's also service. And it's a gift that both of you have given to students, and you can just tell, I think, being in the audience tonight, how much their students have probably been able to take away from them over the years.
I've heard a lot of people over the years tell me about how great Stanley was as a professor, and the difficulties of it too. They would talk about some of the kids who might get shattered by the criticism, but the fact is that you made these kids want to try and work even harder, to know that this was a difficult life that's ahead of you. And it's the truth. It's a very difficult life to be an artist. It's not like the movies. but you gave them a lot.
Yeah, but I don't think it is. But being an artist, I think it's just a great. You're sort of born an artist, you know what I mean. So if you are, it's just a wonderful gift that you have. That you can do this, and it's just a real gift. And I just think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing that I'm able to do that. I never thought I'd be sitting on stage like this. I never thought people would love the work this much. I never did, because I didn't have any early fame, or people didn't know what I was doing. But
you had ambition.
Huh?
You had
no,
ambition.
yeah, I love being in the studio.
Yeah.
But it's something that you really just have to do. So you're going to do it no matter what. I mean, there are a lot of artists. I mean, who don't really get. I mean, I think about Ed Clark. People who. I mean, I knew Ed, and Ed Clark, Afro-American artist. He realized it was all going to happen, and he was old, and he wasn't going to get it. You know what I mean? He wasn't going to get the kind of recognition he deserved, and it was, but sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. But the important thing is he made the art, and the art's there. You know what I mean? And
some of those stories
world,
though are really hard though, because but he was. It's you can't say, I can't say that. You go a certain path and it's going to be the right path, or you can say before you start that this is the right path to a successful career. But he knew Joan Mitchell. He was around a lot of interesting people in his up and comings.
That's
his.
He had a great life.
He was a serious artist.
He had a great life. Don't get me wrong. Ed traveled to paint in China, paint in Brazil. I mean, he had a great life. It's not his life we're talking about. His life was really, a good life. You know what I mean? He stayed in Paris after the war. I mean, he had a great life that way. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about the recognition of seeing the recognition that that you should get recognized for.
Getting to see that show hung, to see the works properly contextualized.
It's not these people had good lives. That's not what I'm talking about.
I mean, I think it's interesting you're saying, you're talking about your own life too, though, and saying, I didn't think I was ever going to get this attention. I think actively you did not. It's not as if, it's not as if you didn't have decades of making a body of work, being able to put it out there, but not in a context where it looked as good as it could, and then giving up on it quicker than I think you wish you had in some ways, and pushing yourself onto the next thing and pushing yourself onto the next thing. This show and the work that we see here is a lot of struggle.
Yeah.
But Stanley,
to try to be seen also.
Yeah. You talk about not being bitter too, and I'm not. What I want to say is this: it's very important, I think, for us to understand that we struggle in our own practices and so forth, and we see some of our colleagues shoot to places, and we see people that we might think, what, that's what everybody's talking about. But you said it so beautifully yesterday about not getting lost in bitterness, but focusing on what you're doing in your own space and there's no schedule of time for when somebody's going to get successful.
No. Even when I was young, I lived on canals, south of the canal. I could walk through Soho when Soho was really the center of the art world. All the galleries were there, and I'd walk up Westbrook and get stuff at all the galleries, look at everything, and I'd go to my studio, which is on Cooper Square, and I would say, okay, Stanley, you saw everything that they like, so you could do that, or you could keep doing this. And I chose to keep doing this. You know what I mean? So you make those choices. It's the right choice. It's like, you stay true to who you really are, and that. And you have so many examples of, you have examples of so many artists who did it. So you have a sense of that, what that is, so, and you get so much from your art, doing it. So you don't have much choice really that way. For me, I had no, it's just the way it is.
This is a great opportunity, I think, for some questions from the audience. There's a microphone, I think, being passed. There's a question here. So I'm going to moderate a few questions so you guys don't have to. Sure. There's a question here in sort of the fifth row.
I just wanted to know what you meant by the statement that the color is in the space, or maybe it was the space is in the color. One of those.
Oh, I'll have to explain that.
If you
just
look at this picture here,
it's just I feel that there's no background. It's just very frontal, you know what I mean, and that it's very open. I think all the areas are very open, and there's lots of color, but there's lots of space in that color. It's really just that simple for me.
I saw your show, and I read, and I think I read it correctly, that you dedicated one of your works to Jack Whitten. Can you please speak to your relationship to him and to his work?
Well, Jack Whitten and sort of Ed Clark, and there's lots of a generation ahead of me who were in New York struggling, who didn't get much attention. And by the time he did, he was pretty old, and he didn't have, say, a life of really, the attention I think he deserved. That happens sometimes. So I just think he's someone who I want to, keep alive and people talk about and realize what he gave the world.
I would like to add, I think, if we talk about the race issue in another sense, that's what the negative side of that is what Jack might have experienced in his work in the way that it was critiqued and judged by others. And but he's being seen as someone as important as Jackson Pollock or Joan Mitchell in the transformational nature of painting. That's as significant as an artist he is. And I would have to say the same about Stanley. And I'll say it, I can give a very educated reason why I would believe that. But this transformation that exists in your work, in particular when I saw that, saw the first room and felt that energy in that room, and what you've done to reach that point of maximal energy is remarkable. Yeah.
There's a woman here in the third row in the center, and then down front after that.
Oh, lots of questions. Huh?
Yeah.
Hi, Stanley. It's a long time since Kansas City together, but hi.
I was wondering if someone from Kansas City would be here.
Yeah, right. There's one of us here anyway. E.G. says hello.
Oh, E.G., my God.
Right.
Now
So I've got a
Tuscan,
couple of
Oklahoma.
things to touch on, if I may.
Okay.
Who was the professor at Kansas City who introduced you to Morris Louis?
I think it was Dick Leatham. Leatham, who it was him, and I went to New York with him. He bought a house in New York.
Right.
He was the one. I think I went to his. I would do paintings. I would take him over and show him my painting. I go, here, what do you think about this? And he showed me a Morris Louis catalog, and I was like, wow. It changed my life really. So that it was Dick Leatham.
Question.
Yeah.
Sorry, and then the second thing is, I've followed your work and I've read a lot of what you've said in various magazines and so forth, but you've repeated this, the color is call and response. Can you touch on that for me, please?
Well, that's kind of a West African, I think call and response. It's like a certain rhythm you say and then you respond to that. It's like it's just it's really simple. It's that I think. I mean, maybe Odili, who's more in West Africa than I am, can really respond to that. But that's how I see it. It's really sort of like this idea of like it's how you communicate. It's a communication thing, and it's also a rhythm thing that you have. That it's just. That's what it is, I think.
And it's an American jazz in the way in which you have that whole thing of instrumentation and people respond. It's a beautiful energy of communication.
Yeah, because when you listen to great music, especially innovative music, it's really a conversation. It's like a trumpet. It's like you play as long as you can, and then someone else comes in and plays and responds to what you did. So it's like that. Mm-hmm. So that's how I think about it. And yeah, exactly. Because the thing in my work, no one color gets in the way of another color. There's no conflict. There's no conflict.
But you also don't plan them in advance. I think that's
No,
really
I don't
important.
plan. No.
Like you're doing in a way your own kind of, you're responding to the color you laid down before too.
Yeah.
There was, I think it's the last, I'm so sorry. I think this is the last question, although maybe someone sneaks one more in. There, if we could pass the mic in the front row. I don't know who had their hand up first. You go ahead. Okay.
Hey, so I'm working on my journey to like becoming an artist, right? I'm gonna go to art school next year. But like, how do I know if I'm going down like the right path, or like how do I stay on this track of what I want to do?
Well, if you don't like it, don't do it.
I love it.
No, I mean, if you're in a studio and you say, I don't like working this way, then working other, I mean, you're gonna make a lot of mistakes. I mean, it's like you're gonna figure it out. Like I say, it's like putting together a recipe. So you're gonna try this, try that. This doesn't work, then this does work, and just keep going until you get till you get to where you want. So it's just as simple as that. To me, it's very that simple. Like I say, you're gonna try to figure out. You'll get to art school and they'll challenge you and give you different assignments, different things to do, and you'll find professors you like. You have professors you don't like. You'll figure it out. You'll piece it together piece by piece. Just be very open and go look at a lot of art. That's a big thing, and really study hard, and you'll be fine.
Odili, any advice?
I would just agree with everything that Stanley said.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would agree. But I want to just say just two more things that I think all the reading you're doing is that you've done over the years, I think should be discussed more. Yeah. And I think, you should talk about that more, but people should ask you more questions about that because I think it really is embedded in the work. And then I love Joseph Albers, and these are not necessarily Albers studies here, but when you talk, there was a question about the call and response. I think when I look at this painting, in fact, you have this at the very bottom, the two reds that sit there next to each other. They harmonize with each other in a way in which the white and the red, just skipping above it, contrast from each other. And there's that, and then the green and yellow right above that do something else. And that's what's really super beautiful about looking at Stanley's paintings, because you're then just thinking through the painting and thinking through the color and thinking through the dialogue as if you were listening to music or in a great conversation with somebody or living life and moving through space with other people. And that's the multiple levels of this work and there's just the genius of this work. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Stanley, thank you so much.
Thanks.